This has been my favourite zoom range for as long as I've been doing photography, and the 10-24 has been my favourite lens for as long as I've been with Fuji. So it's about 6, 7, 8, yeah, a while now. And so what better way to start off a lens review series than by reviewing my favourite lens of all time. For those of you that are wondering about certain parts of this review, feel free to check out the links in the description down below and you can jump along to whatever part you most have interest in. But to start with, let's look at sharpness. The center sharpness on this lens is pretty phenomenal from f4.5 all the way up to f9. From about f9 to f14, it's still really good, and from 14 onwards, it definitely starts to drop quite quickly. When you get into the corner sharpness, these never get tack sharp, unfortunately. Once again though, if you follow that, say, f4.5 to f14, you will still be very, very happy, but the sharpness definitely drops off from about f14, f16 even onwards, and f4, you can definitely get that a little bit sharper just by jumping up to f4.5. It's definitely at its sharpest around that 14 to 16 millimeters. I'd nearly go so far as to say it is a bad lens right on the 10 and the 24 millimeters. However, if you just zoom in just a little bit to say that 11 mil, you back off to say 23 or 22 millimeters, it gets far, far sharper. So if you treat it like, say, as a 12 to 22 f4.5 to f16, you will be phenomenally happy with the results. Unfortunately, the 10 to 24 is not weather sealed, and weather sealing is nearly, or not having weather sealing is nearly a deal breaker for me. As a landscape orientated lens, or as a landscape orientated photographer, you need it more than you'd think. The best light is quite often just before or just after a rain. Being near oceans, waterfalls, during condensation from astrophotography, all those things really take benefit from weather sealing. However, like I said, I've been using this lens for 6 to 7 years now, and I definitely put it through its paces, and it's never let me down yet as far as the weather sealing goes. So I'm not sure what's required to be classified as weather sealed. This does a pretty great job of holding up to it, but weather sealing is definitely a nice factor to consider, and this unfortunately is not. When it comes to value for money, or the price of this lens, it really sits right in the middle of the pack. With the 8 to 16 being the worst case as the most expensive wide angle lens you can get for Fuji, and the 16 to 50 being the cheapest, the XE 16 to 50 being the cheapest lens you could possibly get, this, like I said, sits right in the middle of the pack. So it's not what I'd call a bargain, but it is far, far from a rip-off, and given all the features and versatility you get from this lens, I think it's a great deal. When it comes to versatility, there are not many other wide angle lenses that compete with this. The only other contender, I guess, would be the 8 to 16, but it is a whole different price point and weight. The 10 to 24, well, at 10 millimeters, it is fantastic for getting those drawn in depth foregrounds. If you really want to emphasize your foreground, 10 millimeters, or even if you jump into that little bit of 11, really stands out on its own. But if you want to compress things a little bit more and get more of that human natural eye look, then 24 millimeters really is the spot to go. And so to have all that in this small weight, compact size lens makes it a phenomenal option. F4, that might be the lens's biggest downfall. However, if it was any brighter, then it would get far bigger and far bulkier, and it would cost more. And as a landscape orientated lens, mostly, how often do you shoot at f4? You're normally at f8, f16, trying to get as much depth of field as possible. If you want that really narrow depth of field, then some of those other primes are definitely a better option. And with, say, the exception of astrophotography, where this is just borderline not bright enough, then f4 isn't that big of a deal. But if you get it this small and this light and have it f, say, 2.8, that would be fantastic, but physics don't allow for that. So I think f4 is not too bad of a feature, but it's definitely one of the darkest wide-angle lenses you can get for the Fuji system. As far as lens features goes, that R in the title of it does mean the aperture ring around there, which can be quite useful for when out and about shooting. However, it doesn't have the aperture numbers on there. You do have to look at the back of your screen for it. For those wondering about filter size, it is 72 millimeters, and it does come with the lens hood, though after a little while that does get a little bit of a rattle to it, which you might notice in video. I've got another one here, hold on. Nowhere near as bad. Maybe this lens hood has taken a bit of a knock compared to this one. That's definitely a lot quieter. So maybe ignore the lens hood rattle. It might just be because I've been using this one so much compared to this one. Unlike the 8 to 16, it is very flush at the front, allowing you to use screw-on filters compared to the other wide versatile zoom lens that Fuji offer, the 8-16. It does have quite a large bulge to the front of it, which will not let you use screw-on filters, and you'd have to use a square drop-in filter system instead. So personally, I really like that flatter finish for a wide-angle lens. The other factor is the stabilizer of this lens. It is very useful for video. I love it for that walk and talk at 10mm. It's hard to get much steadier than that. But for photography, maybe I'm just not a big fan of stabilizer. I've never found one that I've felt as good as advertised. Yes, you can still get a couple of stops darker than what the golden rule allows you to do. I'll put that down the bottom here. It is a little bit different if you're using Fuji, so I'll put the Fuji shutter speed rule down the bottom as well. But it still lets you get a couple of stops underexposed and be tack sharp. However, if you're going to do the advertised, say with the XT4 in this lens, and they say 6.5 stops, I don't know how they work it out. For example, at 10mm, you'd better be at 1/16 of a second to get a sharp shot. And 6.5 stops underneath that is, what, close to a couple of seconds? There's no chance in all that you're going to be able to handhold this lens at 10mm 6.5 stops underexposed. So I don't know how they work out those calculations. If any of you know that, please let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to know a bit more about how they work out 6.5 stops of stabilization. When it comes to lens flaws like distortion, vignetting and chromatic aberrations, Fuji correct just about all of these in camera. So for any of these to show, they only ever show up pretty lightly if you get any. On the 10-24, most of these flaws are completely non-existent. Chromatic aberration for a zoom lens, it is fantastic. Granted, it doesn't go as bright as some of the prime lenses, which is when you're more likely to see chromatic aberrations. And for those astrophotographers, you're not going to see your stars disappear due to that fringing of color around the edges. However, be aware if you're doing astrophotography, just because those corners are a little bit softer, you will lose a bit of detail just due to blur unless you really jump into that 11-12mm and jump your aperture up that little bit from f4 to say 4.5 or 5. You'll notice a nice improvement in sharpness for those shooting stars compared to losing that detail to chromatic aberration. When it comes to distortion, if you shoot straight on, if you shoot level, if you shoot like that with your camera, you will notice very little. But as soon as you start to tilt up or down, you'll definitely see like a parallax effect as your buildings, your straight lines really lean in and out of your shots. So that's definitely something to be aware of, especially if you have a flippy screen. You're much better to move up or down rather than tilt up or down to get more into your shot. This does limit it a little bit, and you can fix it in post-production with a bit of crop and lens correction, etc. But then you're losing some of your shot, losing some of your megapixels, etc. So just being aware of that vertical movement rather than tilting will save you a lot of detail in the times and locations where you're getting that parallax, that tilt look effect from being so wide and leaning the wrong way. When it comes to video, it would definitely be nicer to have a brighter aperture. However, it really depends on what you plan to use the lens for. Say for vlogging, f4 at 10mm is absolutely fantastic. Combine that with the lens's stabilizer, plus if you've got IBIS, whatever camera you might be using, then there's no better option for a walk and talk option. However, if you care about the focus, speed and smoothness of the lens, plus how much audio comes out of the lens, then the following test is going to be for you. So first of all is an ambience autofocus sound test. I'm going to point my microphone straight at the lens and move around a little bit so you can hear the sound of it focusing. Though as a benchmark, this is what my light currently sounds like. You hear that little bit of a noise? That's my light. It does make a little bit of sound. So if I now shift this microphone so it is pointing right at the lens, this is what autofocus sounds like with a 10-24. This is at f4 at ISO 640 at 4/48 of a second. Next up for focus speed, I'm going to hold a bit of paper up in front of the lens and then drop it down and see how quickly it grabs my face. This is roughly a meter. This is also filmed on the XT4, so unsurprisingly it's a very quick results, but given the age of the lens, it's still holding up fantastically for as far as video autofocus performance goes. And just like that, it snaps on. I'd be really happy with that AF performance. As you can see though, this compared to the 23 f2, which I was using for the rest of the video, you definitely don't quite get that softer looking background. So in conclusion, I wouldn't use this lens as advertised. If you treated it as a 10-24, f4 to f22, you can definitely be a little bit disappointed with the sharpness of this lens. However, if you treat it as a 12-22, f4.5 to f16, I think it's a phenomenal lens, especially given the versatility of it, the size and weight and the price. I don't know if there's a better first lens to get for a wide angle option for the Fujifilm system. As always guys, thank you very much for following along. I have Fuji sending me all the other wide angle lenses so I can work out an algorithm and put a score together to find out what lenses are best for what situations when it comes to wide angle lenses, especially with the landscape photography focus. If you have any questions, please let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you could like, share and subscribe, it would mean the world to me. But until next time, I'll catch you next time.